"Play that fiddle and I'll adopt you," they said with cruel laughter. No one expected those small hands in yellow gloves to awaken melodies dormant for generations. In an instant, the mockery turned into reverent silence. His eyes closed, his fingers dancing. This is how hope returns when we think we've lost everything. If this story moved you, give me your heart with a like and tell me, how do you imagine the journey of this child with his yellow gloves will end? On the cobblestone streets of Charleston, where old buildings whispered secrets of centuries, lived Leo Thompson, a 10-year-old boy with small hands and large eyes. His home was a humble room in the back of Senator Sterling's mansion, where his mother, Sarah, had worked as a maid since before he was born. The walls of their room were thin, and every night the music from the senator's parties seeped in like water through the stones, flooding the little boy's dreams. Leo had never known a world outside the service. Hallways, backstairs, and whispered orders. His daily uniform was a worn-out grey set, and his hands already showed premature calluses from helping his mother with the cleaning. But there was something in his eyes, a gleam, a spark, that hadn't been dulled by the dust he wiped away every day. That spring night, Senator Sterling was celebrating his 70th birthday. The mansion shone brighter than ever, with chandeliers gleaming in every corner and white flowers adorning the marble columns. Servants scurried frantically, preparing the most sumptuous banquet Charleston would see that year. Sarah, her face tense with pressure, had asked Leo to finish polishing the floor of the grand ballroom before the guests arrived. "Remember, son," she had told him, handing him the shiny yellow cleaning gloves, "you must finish before 8 and return through the service entrance. No one must see you." Leo nodded, his eyes fixed on those gloves that seemed to light up the dark hallway. They were the only truly colourful thing in his world of greys and browns. He put them on proudly, feeling his small hands transform into instruments of worthy labour. In the ballroom, as he rubbed the marble floor with precise circular motions, his eyes constantly drifted toward an object that seemed to pull him like a magnet, a reddish wooden violin resting on a blue velvet pedestal. The instrument had been placed there as part of the decor, a gift the senator would receive that night. The light from the chandeliers drew sparks from the violin's varnish, creating the illusion that the instrument was breathing, alive and expectant. Leo had never touched such an instrument. In his small world, music came from distant voices, old radios, or the murmur of the wind through the garden trees. But something about that violin spoke to him, as if it held secrets only he could uncover. The mansion clock struck 7:30. Leo sped up his movements, aware that he had to finish soon, but his eyes kept wandering to the violin, and his hands, under those yellow gloves, seemed to tingle with a strange anticipation. The first to arrive was Mrs. Beatrice Montclair, a banker's widow known throughout Charleston for her cold beauty and sharp tongue. She was a tall woman of aristocratic bearing, with a face that seemed carved from white marble. Her eyes, a blue so clear it was unsettling, rarely showed warmth. That night she wore a cobalt silk dress that accentuated her paleness, and a sapphire necklace that caught the light with every movement of her neck. She entered the ballroom with a firm stride, followed by a small entourage of admirers who laughed at every biting remark that left her perfectly painted lips. Leo, who hadn't finished the last corner of the room, tried to make himself invisible behind a column, rubbing a spot that was already gleaming with greater intensity. "The senator always has exquisite taste," Mrs. Montclair commented, surveying the room with an evaluating glance. "Although this year I note a certain simplicity, perhaps age is finally catching up to his refinement." Her companions laughed discreetly, while one of them offered her a glass of champagne, which she accepted with fingers gloved in black silk. "They say he's invited the new Secretary of Culture," remarked a man in a grey suit and thin moustache. "A man without pedigree, but with influence. Times change, dear Beatrice. Times change, but class remains," she replied, with a tight smile. Or it should. It was then that her gaze fell on Leo, who had momentarily stopped scrubbing to watch the violin, fascinated. The boy, absorbed in contemplating the instrument, did not notice the cold eyes fixing on him. "Look at that," Mrs. Montclair said in a clear, cutting voice. "The maid's son, scrubbing the floor on a gala night. What a spectacle." The group turned to where the woman was pointing, and laughter soon followed. Leo, suddenly aware of being the center of attention, flushed. to the tips of his ears and lowered his gaze, continuing his work with trembling hands. "Excuse me, ma'am," he mumbled, his voice barely audible. "I'm almost done." But Mrs. Montclair had found her amusement for the night. With elegant steps, she approached the boy, the rustle of her silk dress announcing her arrival like an omen. She stopped a few feet from him, observing him from her imposing height. "Don't worry, little one," she said with false sweetness. "Sometimes one forgets their place." Her eyes drifted to where Leo had been looking, and a malicious smile appeared on her lips. "That violin," she pointed with a long, pale finger, "costs more than your entire family will earn in a lifetime." The laughter increased, and Leo felt a tear threaten to escape his eyes. He held it back, clenching his teeth and concentrating on the circular motion of his hands on the marble. "If you're so interested," she continued, her voice laden with scorn, "play something. If you can make it sing, I'll adopt you tonight." The ballroom, which was beginning to fill with more guests, fell into an expectant silence. Some new arrivals approached, drawn by the scene, forming a semicircle around the kneeling boy and the elegant lady. In the silence that followed Mrs. Montclair's words, Leo felt time stop. His heart was beating so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He thought of his mother, her worried face asking him to finish quickly and return unseen. He thought of the consequences of this moment, the humiliation, perhaps even Sarah losing her job. But something stronger than fear began to grow inside him. An inexplicable certainty, a calling that came from somewhere beyond his understanding. With a calm that surprised even himself, Leo put the cleaning cloth on the floor. With deliberate movements, he removed the yellow gloves, finger by finger, revealing small hands roughened by work. He left them carefully next to the cloth, as if they were precious objects. He stood up, slowly, aware of the mocking glances surrounding him. With hesitant steps at first, then more sure, he approached the pedestal where the violin rested. The distance seemed like miles under the scrutiny of so many elegant eyes. "He's going to ruin it," someone whispered. "Let him humiliate himself," another replied. "It will be a good lesson." Mrs. Montclair watched with a complacent smile, confident of her victory in this small, cruel social game. Her fingers drummed softly against the glass of eau, her champagne flute, setting a rhythm only she heard. Leo finally reached the violin. He gazed at it for an instant, as if facing a sacred apparition. With reverence, he extended his hands toward the instrument. He hesitated a second before touching it, aware that his hands were unworthy of something so beautiful. But then, as if the violin itself called to him, he took it with a naturalness that seemed to surprise everyone. He nestled it under his chin, in a position he had never practiced, but that his body seemed to know. He took the bow with his right hand, feeling its weight, its perfect balance. A collective gasp ran through the room as his fingers positioned themselves on the strings. The first sound was trembling, uncertain, a note that seemed to float in the air for a second before dissolving. Restrained laughter began to break out, but Leo closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his eyelids, something lit up, a memory that was not his, an ancient, deep knowledge. And then the music began to flow. The notes rose, clear and pure as raindrops on glass, a simple melody at first, which gained complexity with every movement of the bow. It wasn't a known piece. It wasn't something he could have learned. It was something born directly from within him, an intimate conversation between his soul and the strings. The laughter ceased. The murmurs faded. The entire ballroom was suspended in a reverent silence, broken only by that unexpected music that seemed to fill every corner, every crack, every heart. Leo saw nothing. His eyes were still closed, but colors, shapes, and memories he hadn't lived appeared in his mind. His fingers moved of their own accord, finding notes he had never studied. The violin vibrated against his shoulder like a living being, responding to his every thought, his every emotion. The melody transformed into something deeply sad, a song of loss and longing that brought a lump to more than one guest's throat. Then it changed again, soaring into a crescendo of hope, of recovered light, of beauty found in the most unexpected places. On Mrs. Montclair's face, the mocking smile had vanished. Her cold eyes now showed a mixture of confusion and disbelief. The glass in her hand trembled slightly, spilling drops of champagne onto the floor that Leo had cleaned with such care. Sarah Thompson ran through the service hallways with a pounding heart. One of the cooks had told her that her son was in the main ballroom, surrounded by guests. Her first thought was of pure terror. Leo must have made a mistake, broken some valuable object, or worse, offended an important guest. Any of these situations could mean the end of her employment at the senator's house, the only support for both of them. As she neared the ballroom, she expected to hear shouting, complaints, or reprimands. Instead, what reached her ears paralyzed her. Music. Music so beautiful it seemed impossible, so profound it almost hurt to hear. She knew every corner of the mansion, every usual sound, and she knew there were no musicians hired to play so early. When she finally managed to enter the ballroom through one of the side doors, the image she found defied all understanding. There, in the center of a circle of elegant guests who watched in absolute silence, was her son, her Leo, the boy who had never touched an instrument in his life, playing a melody that seemed to come from another world. The violin, that costly gift meant for the senator, sang in his small, working hands as if it had been created for him. Leo's fingers danced over the strings with a precision that belied his complete lack of musical training. His face, usually tense with premature responsibility, now showed absolute, almost transcendent serenity. "Pardon me, ladies and gentlemen," Sarah exclaimed automatically, her maternal protective instinct activating before any other emotion. She advanced between the guests, who barely moved to let her pass. "My son didn't mean to bother." Her voice was lost in the air, swallowed by the music and the indifference of those present who did not take their eyes off Leo. Sarah stood motionless, a few feet from her son, torn between the impulse to pull him away and the inability to interrupt something so beautiful. It was then that she noticed a presence beside her. Senator Sterling, a man recently turned 70 with a perfectly trimmed white beard and dark eyes full of wisdom, had stopped next to her. Sarah bowed her head in respect, preparing for the apologies she would have to offer. But the senator was not looking at her. His eyes, wet with emotion, were fixed on Leo. "Is he your son?" he asked softly, without taking his eyes off the boy. "Yes, Senator," Sarah replied, tense. "I apologize for—" "No," the old man interrupted softly. "He has not bothered, ma'am. On the contrary, he has reminded us what the soul is." The music came to an end, with a long, sustained note that seemed to vibrate in the air long after Leo lowered the bow. The silence that followed was absolute, almost sacred. No one applauded, no one spoke. It was as if a spell had seized the entire ballroom. Leo slowly opened his eyes, as if waking from a dream. He looked around, suddenly conscious of all the eyes fixed on him. He saw Mrs. Montclair pale and motionless. He saw unknown faces watching him with astonishment, admiration, even a certain reverence. And finally, he saw his mother. Carefully, almost fearfully, he returned the violin to its pedestal. Without saying a word, he walked toward Sarah, his steps echoing in the absolute silence of the room. When he reached her, he simply took her hand. Mother and son crossed the room toward the side door where Sarah had entered. No one tried to stop them. No one said anything. Only when they were about to disappear down the hallway did Leo stop and look back. His eyes met the senator's, who was watching him with an indecipherable intensity. A slight bow of the head, an almost imperceptible gesture, and Leo continued on his way, disappearing with his mother down the service corridor. In the ballroom, the spell began to break. Guests started murmuring, first in whispers, then in increasingly loud voices. Mrs. Montclair, regaining some of her composure, placed her glass on a passing waiter's tray and fanned herself with a nervous gesture. "Quite a trick," she said, but her voice lacked its usual certainty. "Someone must have taught him that." "No one taught him," the senator replied in a quiet but firm voice. "What we have just witnessed, dear Beatrice, is something money cannot buy." The small room that Sarah and Leo shared in the back of the mansion had never seemed as silent as that night. The stone walls, normally cozy in their modesty, now seemed to contain a universe of unanswered questions. Sarah had prepared a hot soup, more to have something to do with her trembling hands than because they were actually hungry. Leo watched her from the edge of his bed, his dark eyes following his mother's every move. "Are you mad at me?" he finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. Sarah put down the ladle and walked toward her son. She knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. Both their hands were similar, small, strong, marked by work, But tonight, Leo's seemed different, as if they held a secret. "No, son," she replied sincerely. "I'm not mad. I'm confused." She sat next to him on the bed, the old mattress sinking under their weight. "Leo, where did you learn to play like that?" The boy lowered his gaze to his own hands as if the answer were written on his palms. "I don't know, Mom," he said with an honesty that was impossible not to believe. "I'd never touched a violin before, but when I held it in my hands it was like I remembered it, like my fingers knew what to do." Sarah looked at her son's face, searching for any sign that he was making up a story, but found only genuine perplexity and a kind of reverent astonishment at what had happened. "The music," Leo continued, his eyes lost in recent memories. "It didn't come from me, Mum. It came from somewhere else. I just let it out." A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. She remembered something she had tried to forget for years, a conversation with Leo's father, shortly before he disappeared from their lives forever. "My family has a gift," he had said one night under the stars of Charleston. "Music speaks to us. Not everyone receives it, but when it comes, it's like the ancients sing through us." At the time, she had thought they were pretty words, improvised poetry to win her heart. She never imagined they could be literally true. A knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Sarah got up, alarmed. No one knocked on their door so late. Servants were forbidden to receive visitors, and especially after work hours. With trembling hands, she slightly opened the door. In the hallway, lit by an oil lamp, stood Senator Sterling, alone, without companions or servants. "Good evening, Sarah," he said kindly. "I apologize for the hour, but I needed to speak with you both." Sarah opened the door completely, bowing automatically. "Of course, Senator. Please come in." The old man entered the humble room, having to slightly duck his head under the low doorframe. His eyes immediately fell on Leo, who had stood up out of respect. "Good evening, young musician," he greeted with a warm smile. "Good evening, sir," Leo replied, his voice barely audible. The senator looked around, observing the simplicity of the space mother and son shared. A small table, 2 chairs, a bed for each of them, a chest for clothes, and a small shelf with barely half a dozen worn books. The soup steamed in a pot over a small brazier. "I apologize for what happened tonight," he finally said. "They shouldn't have allowed the situation to go that far." "No, sir, I am the one who must apologize," Sarah hurried to say. "My son shouldn't have touched that violin. It was a gift for you." The senator waved his hand, dismissing its importance. "Objects are just objects, Sarah. What matters is the use we put them to." His eyes returned to Leo. "And I have never seen an instrument put to better use than your son gave it tonight." He approached the boy and bent down slightly to be at his height. "Leo, have you played before?" "No, sir," the boy replied sincerely. "Never." The senator nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already knew. "There are gifts that are not learned, that come with us at birth," he said softly, more to himself than to them. "Gifts that it would be a crime not to cultivate." He straightened up and looked at Sarah with a serious but kind expression. "I have a proposition to make to you." Senator Sterling observed the cautious expressions of mother and son before continuing. He understood their reserve. After all, he had never before entered his servants' quarters, and certainly not at such a late hour. "Please, let's sit," he suggested, pointing to the small table. Sarah nodded, quickly pouring a bowl of soup for the unexpected guest. The senator accepted it with a gesture of thanks, although he made no move to taste it. "What we heard tonight was no accident," he began, his fingers drumming softly on the worn wooden table. "There are talents that appear once in a generation, or perhaps once in a century." His eyes, wise and tired, rested on Leo with intensity. "Young man, what you did with that violin was extraordinary." Leo lowered his gaze, uncomfortable with the praise, but with an undisguised sparkle of pride in his eyes. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me," the senator replied with a smile. "Thank whoever gave you that gift. And now the question is, what will we do with it?" Sarah visibly tensed. In her experience, when the rich talked about doing something with the poor, it rarely turned out well for the latter. "Senator, we are very grateful for our jobs and our roof." No, he interrupted softly. "This is not about your employment, Sarah. It's about your son's future." The old man pulled a sealed envelope with red wax from his jacket and placed it on the table. "Inside this envelope is a letter to Dr. Elias Vance, director of the Lincoln School of Music. He is an old friend of mine, and I am sure he will accept Leo as a special student." Sarah and Leo exchanged looks of disbelief. The Lincoln School was a prestigious institution where the children of the elite studied, not the children of Maid'S. "But sir," Sarah murmured, "we couldn't afford—" "You won't have to pay anything," the senator replied firmly. "I will personally take care of the expenses. Leo will receive the best lessons, the best instruments, everything necessary." "Why?" The question came from Leo's lips before he could restrain himself. Sarah gave him a look of reprimand, but the senator did not seem offended. "A fair question," he conceded. "I do it because true art is rare in this world, and when it appears it must be nurtured. I do it because for 70 years I have seen how talent is wasted because of poverty or prejudice." He paused, and his gaze became distant. "And I do it for myself, for the boy I was, who was never allowed to follow his own dreams." The silence that followed these words was charged with contained emotions. Sarah looked at her son, whose eyes shone with a mixture of hope and fear of the unknown. "There is one condition," the senator added, his voice now graver. "You will have to move from here." Sarah held her breath. Losing her job and home was precisely what she feared most. "I have arranged a small apartment near the music school," he continued. "It's modest, but comfortable, and will allow both of you to start a new life. You, Sarah, if you wish, can continue working for me. My new summer house in Virginia needs a trusted housekeeper, or you can look for other employment in Charleston, close to your son. The decision is yours." Tears began to run down Sarah's cheeks. It was too much, too generous, too sudden. "I don't know how to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," the senator interrupted with an affectionate smile. "Wait and see how everything unfolds. The path I propose will not be easy." He directed his gaze to Leo. "There will be hard work, sacrifice, and probably moments when you will wish you had never seen a violin." He rose slowly, his tall figure casting a long shadow on the wall of the small room. "Think about it tonight. Tomorrow you will give me your answer." He walked toward the door, but before leaving he turned one last time. "Leo," he said softly, "that melody you played, do you know its name?" The boy shook his head. "No, sir. It just came out." The senator nodded as if that answer confirmed something important. "It was called Tears of the Dawn. It is a piece believed lost, composed by my great-great-grandfather, Elias Sterling the Foe." He paused meaningfully. "No one has played it in over 100 years." With these enigmatic words, the senator left, leaving behind a silence full of questions and possibilities. The morning arrived with a different clarity in Sarah and Leo's room. The light filtering through the small window seemed brighter, as if the world itself had changed overnight. Sarah had not slept more than 2 hours, her mind too busy weighing the senator's offer, imagining possible futures, fearing hidden traps. Leo, on the other hand, had fallen into a deep sleep. Almost immediately, he now slept with an expression of absolute peace, his small hands resting on the frayed blanket, as if they still held an invisible bow. Sarah watched him sleep, marveling for the 1,000th time at how this small being had come into her life, changing it forever. She wondered, not for the first time, what had become of his father, that traveling musician with dark eyes and an easy smile who had passed through her life like a comet, leaving behind a trail of music, and this extraordinary child. With a sigh, she began to prepare breakfast. Whatever decision they made, today would be the last day of normalcy in their lives. As the water for the tea began to boil, a knock on the door startled her. It was too early for visitors. Opening it, she found Lucy, one of the mansion's youngest housemaids. "Good morning, Sarah," Lucy greeted with evident nervousness. "Mrs. Beatrice Montclair is asking to see your son." Sarah felt her blood run cold. Mrs. Montclair, the woman, who had publicly humiliated Leo, now asked to see him in private. "My son is sleeping," she replied firmly. "Tell the lady I'm sorry, but he is not available." Lucy twisted her hands, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "She insists strongly, Sarah. She is waiting in the small parlor and says she won't leave until she speaks with him." Sarah was about to repeat her refusal when a sleepy voice sounded behind her. "It's okay, Mom. I can go." Leo had woken up and heard the conversation. Stood in the middle of the room, hair tousled and eyes still heavy with sleep, but his expression showed a determination surprising for someone so young. "You don't need to talk to that woman," Sarah said protectively. Not after how she treated you. I want to go, Leo insisted with a calm that seemed out of place for his 10 years. I want to hear what she has to say. Sarah recognized a new strength in her son's eyes, born perhaps the night before in that magical moment in front of the violin. Reluctantly, she nodded. I'll go with you. 20 minutes later, mother and son entered the small parlor, an elegant but intimate room reserved for private conversations. Mrs. Montclair awaited them, seated on a green velvet sofa, her rigid posture betraying her discomfort. Lucy, curiously, did not announce them, but simply let them in and closed the door behind them. Beatrice looked up, and Sarah noticed something different in those usually cold eyes. There was a certain vulnerability, a glint of something that might be shame. "Good morning," the lady greeted in a controlled voice. "Thank you for coming." Leo slightly bowed his head, in a gesture more appropriate for a young gentleman than a boy of his status. "Good morning, ma'am." Mrs. Montclair observed the boy with an indecipherable expression. She wore a less ostentatious suit than the night before, a daytime ensemble in brown tones that, while clearly expensive, was almost sober by comparison. "I suppose you wonder why I requested this meeting," she began, addressing Leo directly as if Sarah were not present. "A little, yes," he admitted. The woman took a deep breath, as if gathering strength. "I have come to apologize," she finally said, every word seeming to cost her enormous effort. "My behavior last night was inappropriate." Sarah watched in astonishment as this haughty woman, known throughout Charleston for her unbreakable pride, struggled to find the right words. "The truth is, I was once a child of humble origin too," Beatrice continued, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Before my marriage to banker Montclair, my family could barely afford the basics. Music." She paused, and for a moment seemed lost in distant memories. "Music was my escape, my dream too." She raised her gaze, meeting Leo's eyes directly. "But unlike you, I had no real talent, only ambition and determination. I studied, I practiced, I exerted myself until my fingers bled, but I never managed to produce a fraction of what you created last night without apparent effort." A tense silence filled the room. Sarah noticed how Leo's shoulders relaxed slightly, as if he understood something important about the adult world and its complex motivations. "Last night I said something cruel as a joke," Mrs. Montclair continued. "I said that if you could make the violin sing, I would adopt you that very night." She took a sealed envelope from her pocket, similar to the one the senator had given them the night before, but with a blue wax seal. "I am not going to adopt you, of course. You have a mother who clearly loves you." She looked briefly at Sarah, with a respect she had never shown before. "But I do want to keep my word, in my own way." She extended the envelope toward Leo, who took it cautiously. "It is a full scholarship to study in New York City at the Juilliard School. It includes accommodation for you and your mother, a monthly stipend, and the best teachers money can buy." Sarah took a step forward, unable to contain herself. "The senator has already offered us a scholarship to the Lincoln School here in Charleston." Beatrice smiled, and for the first time the smile seemed genuine, without the shadow of malice or superiority that usually accompanied it. "I know. He and I spoke last night after the music." Her eyes returned to Leo. "But Juilliard is Juilliard, child. It is the world capital of music, where true geniuses find their place." She stood up, smoothing her skirt with an elegant gesture. "You don't have to decide now. Think about it. Consult with your mother." She paused, and something vulnerable peered from her eyes again. "I only ask you to consider that sometimes people show the worst of themselves when they are actually facing their own ghosts." With a brief nod, Mrs. Montclair walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused for a moment. "By the way," she added, without turning around, "keep the yellow gloves. I think they bring you luck." And with these words, she disappeared through the door, leaving Sarah and Leo with an even harder decision than the one they had when they woke up. The mansion kitchen buzzed with the usual morning activity, but today an extra murmur ran through the air between pots and pans. The servants, normally discreet and focused on their tasks, exchanged glances and whispers whenever Sarah and Leo passed near. The news of the violinist boy had spread like wildfire among the staff, creating a mixture of admiration, envy, and genuine joy for the family. Sarah had decided to fulfill her usual duties while waiting for the moment to give her answer to the senator. She needed the normalcy of her routines to sort out her thoughts, which swung between immense gratitude and fear of the unknown. Leo accompanied her, unusually silent. The two envelopes, the senator's with his red seal and Mrs. Montclair's with the blue seal, weighed in his apron pocket like precious stones too, valuable to be real. "What do you think, son?" Sarah finally asked, as they peeled potatoes together in a quiet corner of the pantry. Leo considered the question with the seriousness of an adult, his small hands working mechanically. "I think everything has changed," he finally replied, "and I don't know if I'm ready." Sarah looked at her son, marveling at the depth she saw in his dark eyes. 10 years old, and he already spoke with the perspective of someone who has lived much longer. "Nothing has changed yet," she gently reminded him. "We can say no, we can continue as before." Leo slowly shook his head. "No, Mom, we can't go back now." He put down the knife and the half-peeled potato. "Last night, when I played that violin, I felt something I had never felt, like I finally found a part of me I didn't know was lost." Sarah felt a lump in her throat. For years she had protected Leo from the world, keeping his expectations low, teaching him to find happiness in the little they had. She had always feared that dreaming of the impossible would only bring pain, but now the impossible had arrived at their door, and her greatest fear was that her own fear would limit her son's flight. "Charleston or New York, then?" she said, trying to make her voice sound light. "Which do you prefer?" Leo reflected, his eyes fixed on a distant point. "Charleston is close," he finally said. "We know the city, the language. The senator has been good to us." He paused. "But New York, everyone says that's where the great musicians go." "Mrs. Montclair hasn't been good to you," Sarah reminded him, a spark of resentment lighting up in her chest as she recalled the public humiliation. "No, she hasn't," Leo agreed. "But I think I understand why she did it." His eyes met his mother's. "Sometimes people act cruelly because they have wounds we can't see." Sarah was speechless at her son's wisdom. When had he grown so much? Or perhaps that deep understanding of the human soul had always been there, waiting for the moment to manifest itself, like his musical talent. The sound of footsteps interrupted their thoughts. Lucy appeared at the pantry entrance, her face showing a mixture of nervousness and excitement. "Sarah, Leo," she said in an agitated voice, "there's someone else who wants to see you, a stranger. He's waiting at the service entrance." Sarah frowned. First the senator, then Mrs. Montclair, and now a stranger. The world seemed to have gone crazy in a matter of hours. "Who is it?" she asked cautiously. "I don't know," Lucy replied. "He's an older man in travel clothes. He says he's come from far away and needs to speak specifically with you." Sarah and Leo exchanged perplexed glances. They had no relatives who might visit them, nor friends outside the circle of servitude. With curiosity and some apprehension, they headed to the service entrance, a small vestibule that connected the back of the mansion to the outside alley. There, sitting on a wooden bench, they found a man of about 60, dressed in simple but clean clothes. His face, tanned by the sun and marked by deep wrinkles, had a quality that was strangely familiar. The man stood up when he saw them, and his eyes, dark and deep as old wells, immediately fixed on Leo. An expression of astonishment followed by something akin to recognition crossed his face. "Sarah Thompson?" he asked in a hoarse voice, addressing her. "Yes," she replied, instinctively placing herself slightly in front of Leo in a protective gesture. "Who are you?" The man smiled, a tired but genuine smile that lit up his weathered face. "My name is Ethan Miller," he said, and then, after a pause loaded with meaning, he added, "I am James's father." Sarah felt her legs weaken. James Miller, the name she hadn't spoken in years. Leo's father. "Grandpa?" Leo's voice broke the tense silence, surprising both Sarah and the newcomer. Ethan Miller looked at the boy with suddenly moist eyes. "So you know," he said in a broken voice. "Your mother has told you about us?" "Only a little," Leo replied, glancing sideways at Sarah. "I know my dad was a musician, like his father and his grandfather before him." Ethan slowly nodded. "A family of musicians, yes, although none as special as you from what I've heard." Sarah looked at the man with surprise, regaining some of her composure. "How did you know? Who told you?" Ethan pulled a folded newspaper from his pocket and held it out to her. It was that very morning's paper. In a small box in the culture section, a headline read, Young prodigy discovered at Senator Sterling's mansion. The article, brief but enthusiastic, mentioned a child of humble origin who had captivated the Charleston elite with a masterful performance. It doesn't mention names, Ethan explained, but it describes a maid and her son, and it mentions that the boy had never played before, but performed Tears of the Dawn. His eyes shone with intensity. That piece is part of our family history. Only a Miller could play it without having learned it. A charged silence fell upon the three of them. Sarah felt the world spinning too fast around her. In less than 24 hours, the entire life she had carefully built for herself and Leo seemed to be crumbling, replaced by an uncertain future, full of possibilities both wonderful and terrifying. "I have come to make you a proposal," Ethan finally said, his voice solemn but kind. "But first, I think we have a lot to talk about." The small cafe 3 blocks from the senator's mansion offered the privacy they needed. Sarah had asked for 2 hours off, something unprecedented in her years of service, but which was granted without question thanks to the extraordinary events of the night before. Ethan Miller stirred his coffee with leisurely movements, while his dark eyes, so similar to Leo's, scanned his grandson's face with a mixture of nostalgia and discovery. The steam rising from the cups created a translucent veil between them, like the faint boundary between past and present. "Your father was the youngest of my 3 children," he began, his voice a low but clear murmur. "From a young age, he showed a special gift for music, although not as extraordinary as yours, Leo." The boy listened with absolute attention, hungry for every word about the man he had never known. "The Millers have been musicians for generations," Ethan continued. "Not famous or rich musicians, but guardians of ancient melodies, songs that tell stories of our land, of our people." Sarah observed Ethan's profile, looking for the features of the man she had loved. She found them in the curve of the jaw, the shape of the hands, a certain cadence in his speech. James had been a younger, more vibrant version of this man, but the essence was the same. James was restless, Ethan smiled sadly. He wanted more than the simple life we had in our small town. He dreamed of Charleston, of New York, of big stages and important audiences. He left us almost 11 years ago. His gaze met Sarah's, a silent question floating between them. "We met in the city square," she said, answering the unasked question. "He played his guitar for tourists. I sold flowers." Her eyes were lost in the distance of the memory. It was like a summer dream. Intense, beautiful, but brief. "What happened to my dad?" Leo asked in a small but firm voice. Ethan and Sarah exchanged glances, neither sure how to answer. "We don't know for sure, son," Sarah finally said. "One day he said he was going to an important job, an audition that could change our lives. He never returned." She tried not to let her voice betray the pain she still felt. "We were expecting you 2 months later." Ethan lowered his gaze to his cup. "For years we looked for him. His brothers, myself, everyone. We traveled to cities, asked in music schools, in orchestras. No one knew anything about him." His fingers, gnarled by age and work, drummed softly on the table, as if searching for notes on an invisible instrument, until we finally found someone who had last seen him, an impresario who organized auditions. "And what did he say?" Sarah asked, leaning forward, her heart pounding. "He said James had arrived at the audition, nervous but determined, that he played like never before, leaving everyone amazed." Ethan paused, his face darkening. "But when he was about to receive the news of his acceptance, he received a call. He rushed out, saying it was a family emergency and never came back." Sarah shook her head, confused. "It doesn't make sense. We didn't call him. We didn't have a phone then." "I know," Ethan said softly. "That's why I think something must have happened to him. James would never have abandoned an opportunity like that. And he would never have abandoned you, Sarah." His eyes rested on Leo, or his son. A heavy silence fell over the table, charged with unanswered questions and ancient sorrows. "I never knew I had a grandson," Ethan continued, his voice regaining some strength. "James didn't tell us he was expecting a son. Perhaps he wanted to surprise us when he succeeded." He smiled sadly. He was like that, always wanting to impress. Leo, who had been listening in silence, finally spoke. "Is that why I can play without having learned? Because of the Miller family?" Ethan looked at him with intensity, as if evaluating how much he could or should say. "In our family there is a legend," he finally said. It is said that centuries ago one of our ancestors, a lonely shepherd, found a cave in the mountains during a storm. Inside he heard music. Not human music, but something older, deeper. He waved his hand, as if pushing away thoughts too fantastic. They are old stories, of course, but what is certain is that in every generation one of us is born with a special gift, the ability to play melodies they have never heard, to feel the music as if it comes from somewhere else. Sarah remembered Leo's words the night before. "It didn't come from me, Mom, it came from somewhere else, I just let it out." "My proposal," Ethan said, returning to the reason for his visit, "is simple. Come with me to Asheville. I have a small music school there. It's not the Lincoln School or Juilliard, but there is something only we can teach Leo." His eyes became intense. How to control the gift. How to listen to the melodies without letting them consume you. Sarah frowned, a new worry surfacing in her mind. Consume? What do you mean? Ethan sighed, running a hand through his grey hair. The gift is powerful, but it comes at a price. The music calls. The more you play, the more you want to play. The more you need to play. He looked at Leo with seriousness. Without guidance, without discipline, it can absorb your entire life. We have seen some get lost in it, become obsessive, forget to eat, sleep, live. A shiver ran down Sarah's back. She remembered Leo's transcendent expression while playing, how he seemed to have transported himself to another place. The beauty of that moment now took on an unsettling nuance. Leo, however, seemed more fascinated than scared. "Are there others like me?" he asked, his eyes bright. "Some," Ethan replied with a warm smile. "Your cousin Chloe, for example. She's 14 and plays the cello as if she were born with one in her hands." His smile widened. "Imagine her face when she learns she has a prodigy cousin, a family, cousins, uncles, a grandfather, a whole world that Leo had never known, people who shared his blood, his history, perhaps even his mysterious gift." Sarah saw her son's eyes light up with a new hope, different from that offered by the senator or Mrs. Montclair. "We have to think about it," she said, aware that there were now 3 possible paths before them, not 2. "There are already other proposals." Ethan nodded, understanding. "Of course. I expected no less." He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket, where he had written an address and a phone number. "I will stay in Charleston 3 more days. You can find me here when you have decided." He slowly stood up, his joints visibly protesting. Before leaving, he turned one last time. "Whatever your decision," Ethan said, looking at Sarah with sincerity, "I'm glad I found you. To know that a part of James is still alive, and that our family's gift continues." As they watched him walk away down the cobbled street, Sarah wondered how it was possible that in less than a day, her quiet, predictable existence had transformed into this crossroads of paths, each offering a future as distinct as it was promising. The sunset fell over Charleston, painting the sky in coppery and violet tones that resembled an impressionist canvas. In the room they shared, Sarah and Leo had arranged 3 envelopes on the small table, the senator's with its red seal, Mrs. Montclair's with its blue seal, and the paper with Ethan Miller's address. 3 paths, 3 possible futures. The senator had granted them the day off to make their decision, a gesture Sarah deeply appreciated. The hours had passed in intermittent conversations, contemplative silences, and occasional tears from Sarah, who felt the weight of this choice with particular intensity. "It's your future, son," she finally said, as the sun began to sink behind Charleston's rooftops. "You have to decide." Leo observed the 3 papers with a concentrated expression, his small fingers drumming softly on the wooden table, creating an unconscious rhythm. "What would you do, Mum?" he asked, looking up at her. Sarah sighed, sitting next to him on the edge of the bed. "I don't know," she admitted honestly. "Each option has something valuable. The senator offers security and prestige. Mrs. Montclair offers New York, the cradle of the arts. And your grandfather," she paused, searching for the words, "offers roots, family, understanding of that special gift you have. And each one wants something from me," Leo added with a maturity that surprised Sarah. "The senator wants me to be his protégé, his discovery. Mrs. Montclair wants to prove something, perhaps to herself, and Grandpa wants to recover something of my dad through me." Sarah looked at her son with a mixture of pride and astonishment. When had he become so perceptive, so capable of seeing the complexities of human motivations? You're right, she conceded, but there is also generosity in each offer, genuine desire to help you develop your talent. Leo slowly nodded, his gaze lost in the window and the changing sky. When I played the violin last night, he said after a long silence, I felt something strange, Mom, as if the music came from far away, but also from deep within, as if it had always been there, waiting. His eyes turned to her, bright and serious. Grandpa talked about the gift consuming you. I think I understand what he means. For a moment, while I played, I forgot who I was, where I was. Only, the music existed. Sarah felt a shiver. The Miller gift, so beautiful and yet so dangerous. Are you afraid? She asked softly. A little, Leo admitted. But I also want to understand it. I want to know where it comes from, how to control it. He paused. I want to meet my family. Sarah then understood where the balance in her son's heart was leaning. Not toward the prestige of Charleston, nor toward the lights of New York, but toward the roots, toward the understanding of himself and the legacy that ran in his veins. However, before she could say anything, a knock on the door interrupted her thoughts. Opening it, they found Lucy, the young housemaid, with an expression of nervousness. The senator requests to see you in his study, she announced. And, she added with some hesitation, Mrs. Beatrice is there too, it seems important. Sarah and Leo exchanged surprised glances, the senator and Mrs. Montclair together. What could this mean? With uncertainty, they followed Lucy through the mansion's hallways until they reached the senator's private study, an elegant room paneled in dark wood and filled with antique books. There, indeed, they found the old man sitting behind his desk, while Mrs. Montclair stood by one of the windows, her profile outlined against the sunset light. But what surprised Sarah the most was the presence of a third person, Ethan Miller, sitting in a leather armchair in a corner with an expression between uncomfortable and determined. Please, come in, the senator invited with a kind gesture. Sit down. Sarah and Leo obeyed, taking 2 chairs in front of the desk. The silence that followed was charged with expectation. I suppose you wonder why I have gathered you, the senator began, his voice calm but firm. The reason is simple. The 3 of us here have made competing offers for Leo's future. Mrs. Montclair turned from the window, her face serene, but her eyes intense. And we have decided that, instead of pressuring you to choose, we should seek a solution that truly benefits the boy, she said, with unusual softness for her. Ethan leaned forward in his seat. We have been talking this afternoon, he explained, addressing Sarah primarily, and we have come to understand that each of us has something valuable to offer Leo. The senator nodded, intertwining his fingers on the desk. Mr. Miller has explained to us the special nature of Leo's gift, a gift that goes beyond conventional technique or talent. Looked at the boy with genuine interest. A gift that needs to be understood as much as it needs to be developed. And I, Beatrice intervened, recognize that international exposure, while important, is not the only thing Leo needs right now. Sarah watched this exchange with growing astonishment. 3 people so different, who barely a day earlier didn't even know each other, now united by her son's extraordinary talent. What exactly do you propose? She asked, her voice cautious. The senator smiled, a gesture that illuminated his aged face. A collaboration rather than a competition, he explained. Leo would begin by studying with his grandfather in Asheville for a year, learning to understand and control his gift. Meanwhile, I would arrange his admission to the Lincoln School of Music for when he is ready. And I, Mrs. Montclair added, would finance quarterly visits by masters from Juilliard, so Leo receives the best technical instruction without having to leave the region. She paused, and for the first time a genuine smile softened her features. And when he turns 15, if he wishes, he can complete his training in New York. Ethan looked at Sarah and Leo with barely contained emotion. You would have a home in Asheville near our family. Leo would meet his cousins, uncles. He would recover the roots he never knew he had. His voice cracked slightly. And Sarah, you could work at my music school if you wish, or do whatever makes you happy. The proposal was so unexpected, so perfectly balanced, that Sarah was speechless. She looked at her son, searching for his reaction. Leo observed the 3 adults with an indecipherable expression. Then, slowly, he reached into his pants pocket and pulled out the yellow cleaning gloves. He gazed at them for a moment as if they contained some secret message. "Can I take these with me?" he finally asked, his voice small but clear. The senator, Beatrice, and Ethan exchanged looks of perplexity at this seemingly trivial question. "Of course," the senator replied kindly. "They are yours." Leo nodded, satisfied. He looked at his mother, and Sarah saw in his eyes that he had made a decision. "I accept," he said simply. "We will go to Asheville." And with these simple words, the future began to take shape, like a melody finally finding its rhythm. The dawn found Sarah and Leo at the Charleston train station, surrounded by a small group of people who had come to say goodbye. Despite the early hour, Senator Sterling was there, elegant as ever, though with a certain weariness in his gaze. Mrs. Montclair, surprisingly, had also come, dressed in a sober grey suit that contrasted with her usual ostentation, and next to them, several members of the mansion staff, including Lucy, whose eyes shone with contained tears. Ethan Miller was busy with the final preparations, supervising the loading of their few belongings into the luggage compartment. Sarah watched the scene with a mixture of anticipated nostalgia and timid hope. Charleston had been her home for her entire adult life. Leaving it was more painful than she had imagined. Leo, for his part, seemed to vibrate with contained energy. His eyes scanned the immense glass vault of the station, marveling at its architectural grandeur. In his left hand he firmly held a violin case, a farewell gift from the senator, and in the pocket of his new coat rested, carefully folded, the yellow gloves that had become his talisman. "We won't forget your generosity, Senator," Sarah said, approaching the old man to say goodbye. The senator took her hands in his with a paternal gesture that moved her. "On the contrary, Sarah, it is your son who has given us an invaluable gift." His eyes, wise and tired, rested on Leo. He reminded us what true art is, something that transcends social classes, formal education, even technique, something that comes from the soul. Mrs. Montclair, who had kept a certain distance, then approached. Her face, normally composed in a mask of control, now showed an unexpected vulnerability. "Leo," she said, leaning slightly to be at the boy's height, "I hope you will accept this." She handed him a small package wrapped in blue silk paper. Leo accepted it with curiosity, and upon opening it discovered an antique brooch in the shape of a treble clef, adorned with small pearls. "It was my grandmother's," Beatrice explained softly. "She also dreamed of being a musician, though she never succeeded." She paused meaningfully. "I would like to think she would be happy to know that it now belongs to someone who will make that dream come true." Leo looked at the brooch with reverence, understanding the value of the gesture beyond the material object. "Thank you, Mum," he said sincerely. "I will always take care of it." A fleeting smile illuminated Beatrice's face, momentarily softening her sharp features. With an elegant gesture, she leaned down and kissed the boy's cheek, an act of affection so unexpected that it left Sarah momentarily speechless. The train's whistle echoed through the station, announcing the imminent departure. Ethan approached them, indicating that it was time to board. "The seats are ready," he announced, his voice tinged with contained emotion. "First-class courtesy of Mrs. Beatrice." The final goodbyes were quick, charged with promises to stay in touch. Lucy hugged Sarah tightly, whispering to her to take good care of her little magic musician. The senator shook Leo's hand solemnly, as if sealing a pact between gentlemen. Finally, mother and son boarded the train, followed by Ethan. They found their seats next to a wide window that offered a perfect view of the platform. Through the glass, they continued to say goodbye with silent gestures, as the train began to move slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Leo watched the figures on the platform become smaller and smaller, until they were mere dots in the distance. When they finally disappeared, he turned to his mother. "Are you sad?" he asked, perceiving the emotion in her eyes. Sarah smiled, discreetly wiping away a tear. "A little," she admitted. "It's hard to leave the place where you've lived for so long." "But we are heading toward something new," Ethan said from his seat across from them. "Toward family, toward roots, toward music," Leo added, his fingers unconsciously drumming on the violin case. The train accelerated, leaving the suburbs of Charleston behind to enter the open fields of the Carolinas. The landscape scrolling past their eyes was of an austere beauty, golden plains under an intense blue sky, occasionally dotted with small towns of white houses and reddish roofs. Ethan began to tell them stories about Asheville, about the Blue Ridge Mountains with their misty peaks and singing waterfalls, about the River Arts District, where artists and musicians shared their ancient crafts, about the sunsets that dyed the horizon red. Our house is in the West Asheville area, he explained, his eyes shining with the pride of someone talking about home. An older neighborhood with tight streets and white houses. From the porch, you can see the mountains. He smiled at Leo. Many musicians live there. At night, if you pay attention, you can hear guitars, fiddles, flutes, like an orchestra scattered over the hills. Leo listened, fascinated, imagining this new world that awaited them, so different from Charleston, with its wide avenues and fast pace. Here, time seemed to flow differently, slower, more in tune with the natural rhythms of light and shadow. Mid-morning, Ethan pulled a small instrument from his travel bag that Sarah didn't immediately recognize. It's an ocarina, he explained, showing it to Leo. A very old instrument. In our family, it's a tradition for children to start with it before moving on to more complex instruments. It was a piece of blue pottery with an ovoid shape, decorated with intricate geometric designs. It had several holes distributed over its surface and a channel for blowing. "Do you want to try it?" he asked, offering it to Leo. The boy took it with reverence, examining it from all angles. When he finally brought it to his lips, Ethan had to show him how to place his fingers over the holes. "Like this. Covering these holes you get different notes," he explained patiently. "Try it." Leo blew softly. The first sound was off-key, provoking an amused grimace on his face. He tried again, adjusting the pressure. This time a clear, pure note emerged from the instrument. "Good," Ethan approved. "Now try changing your fingers, as I showed you." For the next hour, as the landscape gradually changed, becoming more mountainous as they moved into the Appalachians, Ethan taught Leo the rudiments of the ocarina. To no one's surprise, the boy learned with extraordinary speed, as if his fingers remembered something his mind had never known. Sarah watched them in silence, marveling at the natural complicity that had sprung up between grandfather and grandson. It was as if the years of separation had never existed, as if an invisible thread of music and blood had kept them connected through time and distance. By noon, Leo could already play a simple melody Ethan had taught him, an Appalachian lullaby full of melancholic sweetness. The few passengers in the car listened with appreciative smiles, some even tapping the rhythm softly with their feet. "It's the first song your father learnt," Ethan commented when Leo finished, "and his father before him." "And you?" Leo asked, curious. "Was it the first one you learned too?" Ethan smiled, a flash of mischief illuminating his tired eyes. "No," he admitted. "I was more rebellious. The first song I learned was a naughty little tune taught to me by a traveling salesman." He winked. "My mother almost boxed my ears when she heard me sing it at Christmas dinner." The three laughed, and Sarah felt something loosen in her chest. A tension she had carried for years, perhaps since James's disappearance, was slowly beginning to dissolve. The train continued its journey southward, toward an uncertain but promising future, toward Asheville, where the yellow gloves of a small floor cleaner would transform into the golden hands of an exceptional musician. Next step. Would you like me to translate the remaining 2 chapters of the script, The Grandfather and the Musician, as well? A script. Translation: The Golden Hands of Lincoln, the Grandfather. The first sight of Asheville from the train window left Leo breathless. The afternoon sun drew golden gleams from the Blue Ridge Mountains, which rose majestically over the city like a dream of stone and water. At their feet, a labyrinth of narrow streets and white houses spilled down the hills. The West Asheville area, his new home. The train station buzzed with activity when they descended, loaded with their few belongings. Ethan moved with the confidence of someone returning to familiar territory, guiding them through the crowd toward the exit. A surprise awaited them there, a middle-aged man with a cello in a case on his back and a broad smile that revealed an undeniable kinship with Ethan. "Mark!" Ethan exclaimed, embracing the man. "Thanks for coming." "How could I not?" Mark replied, his curious eyes immediately falling on Leo. "So, this is the prodigy." Ethan nodded proudly. "Sarah, Leo, this is Mark, my eldest son, Leo's uncle." Mark bent down to be at the boy's height, extending a calloused but kind hand. "Pleased to meet you, nephew." he said with a warm voice that immediately inspired confidence. "The whole family is waiting to meet you, especially Chloe, who hasn't stopped talking about the violinist cousin since Dad called." Leo shook the offered hand, a shy smile spreading across his lips. Uncle, family, cousin, words that until a few days ago were empty abstractions and now began to be filled with faces, voices, tangible reality. The journey from the station to West Asheville was a gradual introduction to their new life. First in a rickety taxi that left them where the streets began to narrow too much for vehicles, then on foot, climbing steep alleys flanked by whitewashed walls over which bougainvillea and jasmine peered. Mark and Ethan carried the heaviest luggage, while Sarah and Leo followed a few steps behind, absorbed in the singular beauty of the neighborhood. The air smelled of a mixture of flowers, spices, and the unmistakable scent of sun-warmed earth. Every now and then, a half-open door allowed them a glimpse of an inner courtyard with a fountain or an orange tree, or to hear fragments of conversations or distant music. "Everyone knows each other here," Mark explained, occasionally turning to make sure they were following. "West Asheville is like a town within the city, and it's full of musicians, artisans, painters, people who live to create beauty." Leo observed everything with hungry eyes, so absorbing every detail, every color, every sound, so different from Charleston, with its wide avenues and fast pace. Here time seemed to flow differently, slower, more in tune with the natural rhythms of light and shadow. Finally, after a last turn, they arrived at a two-story house with a bright blue door and overflowing pots of red geraniums. Mark took out a key and opened the door, inviting them in with a hospitable gesture. "Welcome to your home," he said simply. The interior was modest but cozy. A small entrance hall led to a central patio with a tiny fountain where water murmured softly. Several rooms were arranged around the patio, a living room with antique but well-maintained furniture, a kitchen that smelled of mint and cinnamon, and several closed doors that they guessed were bedrooms. But the most surprising thing was the people. The patio was full of people of various ages, from an elderly woman with white hair to children barely older than Leo. Everyone fell silent when they entered, creating a moment of expectation that broke when the elderly woman stepped forward, leaning on a carved cane. "So you are James's son," she said in a fragile but firm voice, her dark eyes studying Leo with intensity. "You have his eyes and his air." Leo didn't know how to respond, overwhelmed by the sudden attention of so many strangers who, nevertheless, were his family. Ethan intervened, placing a protective hand on his grandson's shoulder. "Leo, Sarah, this is my mother, Martha, Leo's great-grandmother." The elderly woman smiled, revealing surprisingly complete teeth for her advanced age. 92 years old, she said, as if reading the unasked question in Sarah's eyes. "And I still play the guitar every night, although my fingers are no longer what they used to be." One by one, Ethan introduced the rest of the family. Sophia, his daughter, a piano teacher at the local music school. Tom, Sophia's husband, a luthier who made and repaired musical instruments. His other children and grandchildren, each with their own connection to music, whether professional or simply for the love of the art. And finally, appearing shyly behind Sophia, a girl of about 14 with long black hair gathered in a braid and intensely dark eyes. "This is Chloe," Ethan announced with special pride. "My eldest granddaughter, Mark and Helen's daughter, the family cellist." The girl stepped forward, studying Leo with curiosity. "Is it true that you played Tears of the Dawn without having learned it?" she asked directly without preamble. Leo nodded, somewhat intimidated by the frankness of the question. "I didn't know what it was called then," he admitted. "I just felt it." Chloe exchanged a meaningful look with her grandfather, as if sharing a secret. "I can do that sometimes too," she said in a low, almost confidential voice. "Play things I haven't learned, although not as well as Grandpa says you do." Leo felt a wave of relief. He wasn't the only one. He wasn't an isolated phenomenon. Here, in this house full of music and history, there were others who understood what he was only beginning to understand about himself. Dinner was a noisy, joyful affair, with dishes passed from hand to hand and conversations intersecting in a harmonious chaos. Sarah, initially tense due to the novelty of the situation, gradually relaxed, especially when Helen, Chloe's mother, involved her in a lively discussion about the best ways to prepare Carolina barbecue. Leo, for his part, found himself sitting between Chloe and a slightly older cousin named David, who played the flute. Both bombarded him with questions about Charleston, the senator, the party where he had first played. "And you really had never played before?" David insisted, incredulous. "Not even once." "Never," Leo confirmed. "I didn't even know how to hold a violin correctly." Chloe nodded, as if this confirmed something important. "It's the gift," she said seriously. "Not everyone in the family has it. Grandpa says it skips generations sometimes." "When did you discover you had it?" Leo asked, genuinely curious. "At 9, Chloe replied, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret. "We were at a cello concert, and I felt like the music was calling me. The next day I borrowed my teacher's cello without him noticing, and played the same piece I had heard. Not perfectly, but well enough to scare my mother." David rolled his eyes, clearly having heard the story many times. "I play because I practice 6 hours a day," he said with a hint of resentment, but without real hostility. "Not all of us are lucky enough to be born with the gift." "It's not luck," Martha intervened from the other end of the table, showing that her hearing was as sharp as ever. "It's a responsibility, and it comes with a price." The silence that followed these words was charged with meaning. Leo felt a chill, remembering what Ethan had mentioned about people being consumed by the gift. It was Tom, the luthier, who finally broke the moment of tension. "But tonight is for celebration," he said in a warm voice, raising his glass. "For the family gathered. For Leo and Sarah, who have found their way home." Everyone raised their glasses, even the children with their juice cups. The clinking of glass resonated in the small patio, mixing with the constant murmur of the fountain. After dinner, while Sarah helped clear the table with Helen and Sophia, Martha motioned for Leo to approach. The elderly woman had retired to a corner of the patio, where an old guitar rested on a stand. "Come here, child," she said, patting the space next to her on a small wooden bench. "I want to show you something." Leo obeyed, sitting next to his great-grandmother with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Martha took the guitar, settling it on her lap with the familiarity of someone who has performed the same gesture thousands of times. Her fingers, gnarled by age but surprisingly agile, gently plucked. The strings. A simple melody began to flow, sweet and nostalgic. Leo immediately recognized it. It was the same Appalachian lullaby Ethan had taught him on the train, but interpreted with a depth and sensitivity that transformed it into something much richer. "This song," Martha said without stopping playing, "has been in our family for generations. Some say it dates back to the time of the early settlers, others that it was composed by an ancestor of ours who loved an impossible woman." She smiled, her eyes lost in distant memories. "The truth has been lost to time, but the music remains." Her fingers continued dancing over the strings, extracting notes that seemed suspended in the night air. "The gift you have, that Chloe has, that your father had," she continued, "is beautiful but dangerous. It allows you to hear music that others cannot, to play melodies that come from somewhere beyond time." Her eyes, a brown so dark it looked black, fixed on Leo's. "But it can consume you if you don't learn to control it, to master it instead of letting it master you." Leo nodded, instinctively understanding the gravity of what his great-grandmother was trying to convey. "How?" he asked simply. Martha smiled, pleased by the direct question. "With discipline, with technique. Paradoxically, the better your mastery of the instrument, the more freedom you will have to control the gift instead of being controlled by it." She paused, her fingers momentarily stopping the melody. "And always remember that you are more than your music, that you have a life outside of it. Family, friends, love." She resumed the song, now adding subtle variations that enriched it without distorting it. "Tomorrow you will begin your lessons with Ethan and me," she said, her voice mixing with the notes. "We will teach you what you need to know, not just about music, but about your heritage, about who you really are." The melody came to an end, with a soft chord that seemed to dissolve into the Asheville night. In the distance, as if answering, the sound of other guitars, singing voices and handclaps marking bluegrass rhythms could be heard. Leo looked around, the patio with its whispering fountain, the stars visible in the rectangle of sky overhead, his mother conversing animatedly with people who were strangers yesterday and were now family. For the first time since he had taken that violin in the senator's ballroom, he felt he was exactly where he was supposed to be. That somehow, all paths, Charleston, New York, Asheville, had always led to this moment, to this patio, to this guitar, to this discovery of his roots. The yellow gloves, carefully folded in his jacket pocket, were no longer a reminder of what he had left behind, but a symbol of what had brought him here. The musician, 5 years had passed since that night when James Miller returned to his son's life. 5 years of changes, of growth, of music that flowed like a constant river through their intertwined lives. Asheville remained the center of his universe, although now Leo, having just turned 16, traveled regularly. His studies took him to Charleston once a month, where he worked with the best masters at the Lincoln School of Music, under the attentive patronage of Senator Sterling. Twice a year he traveled to New York City, where Mrs. Montclair had arranged master classes with world eminences who were invariably impressed by the young American violinist. But he always returned to the house with the Blue Door in West Asheville, where his family waited, where music tasted like home. This spring afternoon, Leo was on the house's porch, contemplating the Blue Ridge Mountains glistening under the sunset sun. His hands, no longer small but long and strong, absently caressed the strings of a violin the senator had given him for his 16th birthday, an antique instrument with a history almost as rich as his own. The sound of footsteps made him turn. His father approached, carrying 2 cups of mint tea, a tradition they had adopted for their evening conversations. James had changed in these 5 years. Grey hairs had advanced on his temples, but his face showed less tension, as if every day of reconnection with his son and his family had relieved an invisible weight. He now worked as a teacher at Ethan's music school, and occasionally gave concerts in Asheville and other towns in the Appalachian region. His relationship with Sarah had slowly been rebuilt, with the patience of those who know that some wounds need time to heal completely. They had not returned to being a couple, but they had found a deep friendship, mutual respect, and a shared commitment to Leo that was, in its own way, a form of love. "Pensive this afternoon," James commented, offering him one of the cups. Leo accepted the hot drink, inhaling the refreshing aroma of mint. "Just reflecting," he replied, "on everything that has happened since that night in Charleston." James nodded, understanding. Both had become experts in these conversations, halfway between the said and the unsaid, where words and silences had equal importance. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't played the violin that night," Leo continued, his eyes fixed on the Golden Mountains. "If Mrs. Montclair hadn't challenged me, if I had finished cleaning the floor and left unseen." "But you did," James said simply, "and that decision changed everything." Leo smiled, remembering the moment. The weight of the violin, in his inexperienced hands, the expectant silence, and then the music flowing through him as if it had always been there, waiting to be released. "Grandpa says some things are written," he said, turning to his father, "that sooner or later the gift would have found a way to manifest itself." James nodded, thoughtful. "Perhaps," he conceded, "but you chose to embrace your gift instead of fearing it. That was your decision. No one made it for you." It was true. Over these years, Leo had learned that the Miller gift was not just a blessing or a curse, but a responsibility. He had seen other musicians with similar talents get lost in obsession, in the search for perfection, forgetting to live. Thanks to the teachings of Martha, Ethan, and now his father, he had learned to balance the passion for music with the need for a full, connected life. "Do you know what day it is today?" James asked, changing the subject slightly. Leo frowned, trying to remember if he had forgotten an important date. "May 5th, he replied without seeing the relevance. James smiled enigmatically. Exactly 6 years ago, a boy with yellow gloves cleaned the floor of a mansion in Charleston without knowing that his life was about to change forever. Leo straightened up, surprised. He hadn't kept track with such precision. "Are you sure?" James nodded. "Your mother keeps a record of these dates. She says they are too important to forget." A comfortable silence settled between them as they gazed at the mountains, each lost in their own thoughts. Leo reflected on those 6 years, on how that frightened boy with yellow gloves had transformed into the young man he was now, confident, talented, loved. "I have something for you," James finally said, pulling a small package wrapped in simple paper from his pocket. Leo accepted it with curiosity. Opening it, he found a pair of fine leather gloves, a soft, warm yellow, designed for an adult. "They are violinist's gloves," James explained. For cold, days when your hands need to stay warm between performances, but they are also a reminder, his eyes met his son's, of where you come from, of who you are. Leo caressed the soft leather, moved by the symbolism of the gift. The yellow gloves, once a symbol of his humble condition, now transformed into an emblem of his identity as a musician, as a miller, as the son of two worlds that had found harmony in his person. "Thank you," he said simply, but the word contained much more than gratitude. For a gift, it was thanks for the presence, for the understanding, for the years recovered. The sound of more footsteps on the stairs announced new presences. Sarah appeared on the porch, accompanied by Chloe, now a 19-year-old who studied cello at the Lincoln School in Charleston and returned to Asheville on every break. Behind them came Ethan, Martha, who at 97 years old was still the heart of the family, and several cousins and uncles. "Here they are," Sarah said with a smile. "Ready for the surprise?" Leo looked at his father, who seemed as confused as he was. "What surprise?" he asked. Sarah exchanged a knowing look with Chloe. "Well, since today is an important anniversary, we decided to organize a little celebration for you." She stepped aside slightly, revealing that every family member was carrying an instrument: guitars, an accordion, a flute, a drum. Martha, leaning on her carved cane, held her old guitar with the dignity of an ancient queen. "A family jam session," Ethan explained, his eyes sparkling, "like the good old days." Leo took his violin and joined the family improvisation, melodies intertwined like threads of an ancient tapestry, each instrument adding its unique voice to the musical conversation. Martha started with the Appalachian Lullaby, the first song Leo had learned, and the others followed, transforming it into something new, yet deeply familiar. As he played, Leo observed the hands of his family, Martha's wrinkled but firm hands, his father's expert hands, his mother's gentle hands that had found her own way in music, and his own hands, which had once scrubbed floors with yellow gloves and now created beauty. When the music reached its climax, Leo improvised a variation of Tears of the Dawn, the melody that had changed his destiny that night in Charleston. The notes rose over West Asheville, toward the Golden Mountains, like a message to the universe. The last chord vibrated in the air, suspended like a promise. Leo looked at his gathered family, at his found home, and finally understood that true music was not just in the strings of the violin, but in the invisible ties that united their hearts. "Music is like life," Martha said, breaking the silence with the wisdom of her 97 years. "It doesn't matter where it begins, but how you transform it into your own path." Leo nodded, gently squeezing the new yellow gloves in his pocket. He was no longer the maid's son, nor the discovered prodigy, nor even just the heir to the Miller gift. He was all those things and more. He was Leo, forging his own melody with the hands that time had given him.